right. Yeah, celebrating abundance, celebrating all the ways in which we give. And what a powerful thought that if we are truly one, that every gift that we give, we're giving to ourselves. Not in some selfish way, but in the truth that we're all part of the whole. And everywhere that we give, we're touching some part of the life of the divine. And that's a powerful thought. And then we come to this notion when we talk about this giving. And what I notice is that for some people, it's a bit of a four-letter word. Yeah. It's, riles up thoughts, past beliefs, conversations about money, about churches that are always asking for your money, and all the things that we have in our childhood from that. And so it's an opportunity for us to really explore what is it that we mean by these things, and what's there for us. So what is this four-letter word we're talking about? What is this four-letter word we're talking about? Pledging. No, that's a six-letter word. Tithe. Oh, no, that's a five-letter word. Pledging and tithing. And yet, many of you in this room already practice pledging, and you already practice tithing, and you already know the value that it is in your own life, and grateful that you choose to pledge and tithe here. Many of you have a deep spiritual meditation practice, and you already know what a difference that makes. Many of you already do prayer, and you use practitioners on a regular basis, and you already know how that works in your own lives. Many of you are already giving in service. You see, these are the practices that we have come together to learn and to really grow our spiritual maturity. And for those of you who are already walking the walk, good for you. And we can walk more deeply together. But some of us are not yet there. Some of us, we're lucky if we meditate 3 minutes once a week. Some of us call a practitioner. Why would we want to do that? Hadn't really thought about that. I can remember when I first got into Science of Mind, and I did everything until I was so flat on the ground, exhausted, and then it occurred to me, maybe I should pray. Right? Sometimes it's the very last thing that we do, and our practice is to learn to make it the first thing that we do before we end up on the floor. And so pledging and tithing is part of our spiritual practice. And we are, just like all the other spiritual practices, this one may be the one that activates us. And so, what is the four-letter word that we are actually talking about? Well, I think there are actually two four-letter words that we're talking about. The first one is fear, and the second one is love. Jerry Jim Polsky said years and years and years ago, there's only two options in the way in which we engage in life, fear or love. And when we talk about our spiritual practices, particularly this spiritual practice, it is so amazing how deeply it illuminates the way in which we're walking around in the world. I love this month of October. I love talking about abundance. I love talking about prosperity. I love talking about pledging and tithing. Why? Because it pushes our buttons. And when it pushes our buttons, do you see these things are being activated so that we can look at them? One of the things that we understand is the way in which we do anything that activates us, the way in which we do anything in life is actually the way in which we do everything, particularly in those areas around which we're activated. And so if we find ourselves being activated about this conversation, there's something really important going on. There's a deep opportunity for healing this dichotomy of whether or not we're living from fear or whether we're living with love. Now, I don't mean fear like shaking in your boots fear. I don't mean fear like, I'm so afraid that something terrible is going to happen. I don't necessarily mean that kind of fear, although that's sort of fear in its largest extreme, isn't it? But fear, for me, is when we walk around in the world contracted. I know that I am living my life from fear when I pull away, when I withdraw, when we are contracting ourselves energetically. That is, whether it's small or large, that is when fear is operating in our lives. And whether it's about money or about starting a new business or having a new relationship or simply going someplace we've never been before. You see, the way in which we energetically engage in life is how we're going to experience it. And so fear is that contracted place where we are withdrawing or pushing away or closing down, closing ourselves off. And how do we connect with life when we've done that? How do we give our gift when we've done that? So the other side of that coin is love. Now, personally, I don't think that love is actually a feeling, not in the way in which we're using the word here. We're not talking about romantic love. We're not talking about even friendship love. Ernest Holmes says love is the self-givingness of spirit into creation. Love is the self-givingness of spirit into creation. So anything that we give ourselves to, we are in the act of loving. And so do you see that giving ourselves to is an outward act? I think of it energetically as expanding. Anything that expands us, that calls us to be more, that calls us to open, that calls us to engage, that calls us to push our energy outward, this is us operating as love in the world. And this is the way in which we give our gift. This is the way in which we show up. This is the way in which we are who we are called here to be. This is how we actually manifest heaven on earth. Because if we are the incarnations of the divine, we are actually the hands and voice and heart and eyes of spirit moving in the world. So love is a decision. It's a way in which we act or behave. It's a way in which we choose to show up expandedly, in an expanded way, in a way that invites that in others. And so immediately what happens? There's the possibility for connection. There's the possibility for growth. There's the possibility for possibilities. There's the possibility for more because the energy is flowing this way. And so our spiritual practice of pledging and tithing actually activates this very thing within us so that we can see how are we moving in the world. And we can use our practice to begin to shift from fear, from that place of contraction to love, that place of giving. Now, if you've been on Facebook in the last couple of days, you'll have seen this image. It's a beautiful image that Reverend Karen took, and when I asked her, I said, do you have an image of a bumblebee flitting around a flower? And she said, oh, yeah, this gorgeous image. Look, it's so crisp and clear. You can even see the eyes and the little hair on the abdomen. It's like, wow, this is really amazing. And I'm thinking, what does this have to do with pledging and tithing and love? It's pretty funny. And so it is an absolutely gorgeous image. It's a beautiful image of this beautiful bee. And the question is, what does this have to do with pledging and tithing? So, this is not a rhetorical question. This is a question for you. Why are we using this image of a bee on a flower in this particular talk about pledging and tithing? What does it evoke in you? Debbie? Demonstrates the giving and the receiving. Okay.
The openness to flowers opening up to receive, and as it receives, you also see the flowers opening both to the receiving and also opening to the giving.
Beautiful. All right. Who else? I saw other hands. Yes?
Creating a buzz.
Creating a buzz. I love that. Creating a buzz. Beautiful. Okay. Good. All right. Say it here. I'm going to give you the microphone so people can hear you.
Well, I was privy to it on Facebook too, so I was part of that discussion. But it at the same time it reminded me of the cross-pollination.
Yes. Beautiful. The cross-pollination. All right. Yes. Good. Thank you. We'll come right here back to you, Bill.
I think it's representative of that the bee collects pollen for the good of the whole hive, and they all prosper from their effort.
Beautiful. The bee collects pollen for the good of the whole hive. All right.
The end result is sweet.
The end result is sweet. True, true. Because it's love. It's love. Oh, I got one all the way in the back there. All right, you come towards me and I'll come towards you. And no, that's all right. It's good.
I see survival.
Survival. Okay, so the bee and the honey and the flower are growing and surviving together.
How about bee love?
Bee love. Yes, absolutely. All right. One more. Yes. Okay.
I think it's a demonstration of the law of nature.
A demonstration of the law of nature. And what is that law? That we all need each other, isn't it? That law of, wait, okay. Did I hear something? Yeah, sure. Okay, good. Come towards me and I'll come towards you. Where's the hand? Up. All right. Good. No, it's all good.
It represents building because bees, well, they represent the number 8, and the way that they build is so intricate, and it all, it's in the circle of life, but building.
Beautiful. It represents building. Good. And so let me ask you this question. Can the flower survive without the bees? No. Man. And don't you know, right? This is what's happening today. The collapse of the bee colonies, and that our very food is threatened because of it, because we don't understand how critical the inner relationship is between bee and flower. I know Joe has said something great between services. You have to say it out loud.
I just remembered. And if you're in a barren place with no flowers, you can't just wait for the bees to show up. You'll have to plant some flowers to get it going.
Ooh, good thought, right? Yep. And so what an amazing thing to think about, right? So the bees, the flowers can't grow. They won't pollinate. There'll be no fruit without the bees. And if there are no flowers, there are no bees. The bees have nothing to pollinate. They have nowhere to collect honey. They have nothing to feed in the hive. And do you see how intricately woven together it is? And as the bee moves from flower to flower to flower to flower, that pollination brings life. It brings life. Now, I don't know about you, but man, I just think that's love made manifest. Don't you? The flower is wide open to receive and gives of its pollen effortlessly. And the bee lovingly goes and collects, and it doesn't discriminate from flower to flower. It just goes from one to the next and is just spreading life. What an extraordinary thing to think about. And so when we are engaged in this process, do you see, we're participating in this. However you see yourself in the metaphor, sometimes we're the flower, sometimes we're the bee. Sometimes we're part of the colony. We're part of the collection, right? Last week we did the New Member Sunday. Sometimes we're part of the garden. All of those pieces and parts, we're a part of all of that. And without us participating like that, then things begin to collapse. And there isn't that forward movement, just as we're experiencing with our bees in nature today. Why it's so critical that we pay attention to these things. So we come to our community here. So this is a question I get asked often. What's the difference between pledging and tithing? So a pledge is a promise, right? That's what you do. You pledge your love, you pledge your money, you pledge in a marriage ceremony, you pledge. A pledge is a promise. And when you promise to give us money basically, you're not giving it to me. You're not giving it to Reverend Karen. You're not even actually giving it to the organization. The truth is you're promising to give it to each other so that collectively we can have this experience. You're promising to give it to each other so that we can bring our children, so that it will be here tomorrow when we need it or someone else needs it. So our pledge is our promise. And the court council uses that promise to develop a budget. We develop a very straightforward adult relationship as a community and leadership. You tell us how much you're going to give us, and that's what we'll budget on. And if we would like to do more things, then we need a larger budget. This is the promise, and it says you can count on me for this. Now, a tithe is a spiritual practice. A tithe is a 10% return through the use of appreciation and gratitude. It is a 10% return of all of the good that we have already received. And it is a deliberate spiritual practice that puts us in relationship with life and reminds us of the abundance of the universe that we live in. Your tithe is between you and God. Your pledge is between you and your community. Now, we invite you to pledge a tithe. We hope that you will pledge your tithe here. But we're asking you to pledge something, anything, every bit matters. Whether the bee goes out and pollinates just one flower or a whole tree, it matters, right? Every bit of it matters. And so what we're asking you to do is pledge to this community, to grow and prosper this community. What we're inviting you to do is to step out into the spiritual practice of tithing, because I know how, and we know how incredible it is. Now, let me just tell you this story. When I came here, many of you have heard this story, but some of you are new enough that you haven't. When I came here as the interim minister in 1993, those of you who were here last night, you know, Michael got here like 2-3 weeks before me. I was the interim minister. I got here and they fired the minister for spending all their money. And the minister left, took 80 people with him. So there were 20 people left, and we were $50,000 in debt. We were in a building that was way too big for us, and I was asked to step in as the interim minister. I had a 18-month-old child, and I was a full-time student. So I was full-time mom, full-time student. I became a full-time minister for a year. And so the core council and the board at the time and we sat together and we said, well, so what are we going to do? How are we going to turn this around? And I said, we're going to tithe. Excuse me. We have rent. We have to pay bills. Yeah, but this is the spiritual practice. Tithing is the spiritual practice. Tithing is the practice that says, I know where my supply is. I know who my source is. And I step out on faith. So that board of trustees, they trusted me enough to say, okay, we'll do it. So every week we would take in the offering, and the next Monday morning we would count it, and we would write 10% to CSL, now in Golden, our national organization. In 6 months, we had rebuilt the church and we had paid $50,000 in debt off by tithing. I helped them hire a minister. She was wonderful. I helped them hire a minister because I was a full-time student and a full-time mom. I didn't need a full-time job. I helped them hire a minister. She was here for 2.5 years. She decided to get married, moved to Austin, and I was still hanging around. They said, wouldn't you like to be the interim minister again? And we were back down to 20 people and we were $30,000 in debt. Deja vu. It was a big deja vu moment. Like, man, didn't we just do this before? But it was a whole new group of people. It was a whole new board of trustees. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Oh, and then not only did we owe $30,000, but we also owed the minister money, and they had put the tithe on the books as a bill they hadn't paid in a year. A tithe is not a bill. You never owe a tithe. You either paid it or you didn't. That's it. You either meditated or you didn't. You don't you don't meditate for an hour today because you only meditated for 5 minutes yesterday. Right? You either meditated or you didn't. You don't owe a tithe. A tithe is not something you hold on the balance sheet. You pay it. You pay it immediately on the first fruits of our labor. That's what a tithe is. So we wiped out the tithe. We said, okay, that's silly. This is not a bill. And we did exactly the same thing. In 4.5 months, we were paid off. And at that point, they said, would you please stay? And I said, okay, I don't think I want to do this again. I think twice is enough. Do you see? Now, it's not magic. This is not magical thinking. It's not magic. This is using the laws that we talked about last week. This is understanding and using these laws and absolutely being willing to step out on faith on the law that we cannot see. Now, when I first personally started tithing, I'll tell you the truth, I didn't start tithing, I started pledging. A very small amount. But at least I began the consistent practice of giving. And it felt like a lot. And I would hear people talk about tithing. I was very young. I was 19, 20. I'd run away from home when I was 15. Nobody had ever given me anything. I had bootstrapped myself up into trying to make my life work. And I started pledging. And it was a small amount, but it was my commitment because the center meant so much to me. And my goal was to tithe. And every year I increased that. Every year until I was fully tithing. And then I was so excited because I realized that I was writing those checks without fear. Do you see, when I first started writing those checks, it was like, oh, I just don't know whether I can do this. But every year I showed myself I could do a little more and a little more and a little more. And then pretty soon I was tithing and I was pledging because I believed in what I was getting out of the center. It had saved my life. I let go of drugs and alcohol and all that running around and carousing, and I really began to put my life together, and it was because of Science of Mind and that center. And so then my pledge was about this place. This place, I believe in this place, and I'm willing to do my part to make it happen. And that began to grow and began to grow. And then I'll never forget the day I decided, oh my God, I am going to imagine writing a tithe check with a comma in it. Yeah, because when I write a tithe check with a comma in it, do you know how much abundance that will mean I've experienced in my life? Amen. Thank you, sister. You bet. And I realized that I had moved to an entirely different place with tithing. Tithing had been the training wheels for my walk of faith, which turned a practice, first a little scary practice, then a practice of I want to be a part of this, into a practice of gratitude and appreciation. I can't wait to write my tithe checks, and I love them when they're really big. I love it when CSL writes really big tithe checks because we are being grateful and appreciative of the good that we have experienced in our own lives. In our beautiful book, Busting Loose from the Money Game, Robert Scheinfeld says this: expressing appreciation is one of the most natural and empowering forms of expression there is. It is a great gift to create an opportunity to express or receive appreciation. Appreciation is an acknowledgement of the value of a creation. Money is just the symbol of that expression. This is a very subtle but important point to really get. Appreciation is an acknowledgement of the value of a creation. The center, your life, the beauty of nature, the very created world in which we live. There's so much to be grateful for as we move through our life every day. Robert Scheinfeld goes on to say this: expressing appreciation in the form of money then becomes like breathing. You don't worry about where your next breath will come from, do you? You don't measure or track how much air is available to you right now, or how much will be available to you in the future. You don't try to get more air or protect the air you already have. You just breathe without thinking about it. And you have total faith that the air will always be there for you. Living from your natural state of infinite abundance works the same way. You just breathe your abundance. You just breathe your abundance, breathing in all the good that the universe is forever showering upon us and breathing out the gifts that we have to share. Each and every one of us, we have a gift to share. That's why we're here, is to be that gift in the world. And so tithing is one of our relational spiritual practices. Sacred giving is this practice that puts us in right relationship to the divine and to those things that we value, those creations we value. We teach 5 spiritual practices here. Meditation and visioning, they're receptive practices. They're practices in which we open ourselves to the divine, and we feel the inflow of love and the intuition of inspiration. Spiritual mind treatment, our form of affirmative prayer, that is the directive spiritual practice. That's when we deliberately use the power of our choice and we exercise our understanding of the law and we direct life into creation. And then sacred service and sacred giving, tithing, these are our relational spiritual practices. They remind us that we're in this together, that we can't do this alone, that we ourselves are the body of God. This is the manifest body of God, the universe. The physical universe is the manifest body of God, but we're the place. We're the place where love shows up. We're the actual hands and heart and eyes and voice. We are the way in which the divine is incarnated and made manifest in the universe in a conscious and deliberate manner. And so we need each other and to experience that, and through our relationship with each other, we express it. And so this becomes part of our spiritual practice because it reminds us every day, every week, every month that we are in relationship to an infinite abundance that supports us and to each other as we share that love that we are.